Welcome to the Zoë Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hey ho, it's Zoe, and this is a solosode. I'm recording this on the 16th of October, and it should be coming out on the 31st of October. So therefore, happy Halloween. Halloween is such a big deal in Canada. It is one of my most favorite holidays. Always look forward to dressing up, getting a costume ready, and then this exhilarating, blustery nighttime trudge around the neighborhood, trick-or-treating and getting a boatload of chocolate goodies at the end of an hour or two of doing that. And invariably, where I grew up in Winnipeg, it was cold and windy and wet often. And it was so much fun. So happy Halloween to you wherever you are. On Planet Human this week. Well, it's depressing news, to be honest. We've had a no vote in the referendum against disallowing or not accepting or saying no to recognition of our First Nations people, our first peoples of this country, through the mechanism of the voice to Parliament. So Australia voted. About 60% of Australia said, no, we don't want that. So that's on our Planet Human. The other Planet Human is the Israel-Gaza war, which is also very depressing and sad. And with all of this, it's easy to ruminate and get swallowed up by the big gap in humanity that we're seeing here in both of these exercises. So the leadership question that we need to ask in order to turn around the depressive downward spiral, which is easy to fall into, to be honest, looking at the news. Here's the question I came up with. What human systems can we design that allow for all human flourishing? Essentially, that's what this is about. Both those conflicts, the referendum and the Israel-Gaza war, are about the human systems that we've designed or have failed to design. So if we are to take that as a principle, what are the human systems that we might design that would allow for all of human flourishing? It changes the conversation, doesn't it? It's like, what problems do we fix is a different conversation than what systems can we design for human flourishing. That is what's giving me a little bit of hope. So if we play with that, if we mull on that, then we might come up with better ways forward than what we've had in the past. So on Planet Zoe, woohoo, I am in the middle of a very busy spring with plenty of travel. After a quiet year in my practice and not much travel at all, wham bam, it's all happening this spring down here. I have been to Broome in WA, which is fantastic and hot and sweaty, and that was some wonderful strategy work out there with the Kimberley Health Population Unit. I went back again for the second time to Perth and down to Margaret River, where I worked with Outback Initiatives with the Singapore Immigration Leadership Development Program. I was a facilitator on that program, so I got to get my pack out, go bushwalking, kayaking, climbing and abseiling, and caving. Woo, so much fun. All in the context of developing high-performing teams for Singapore immigration and high-level leadership. In between all of that, I went to Orange, where I worked with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and ran a resilience and risk workshop for some emerging farmer leaders there. Tomorrow, or actually not tomorrow, quite soon as I record this, I'll be heading to Mildura, where I'll be working with Prince's Court Homes on their strategy with the board and executive. And at the end of this week, I'm heading back to Perth for the third time to do another leadership program with Outback Initiatives. Very exciting, very tough. Actually, those programs are quite tough, physically demanding, intellectually rigorous, and require a lot of focus. And it's super fun. Largely, I'm finding I am loving being in service to the work, whether it's in front of a group running a workshop, delivering leadership training, as I was this morning, which is a writing workshop to the Australian Sports Commission through my work with the Leadership Sphere. Showing up and being of service to leaders who are doing the tough jobs, that is what I stump up for every day. So if that's you and you want somebody to stump up for you, hey, I'm your lady. All right. So I've also been thinking about the future of leadership. And in all this mulling, there's really three things, and it's something I put forward in my keynote this year. Three things that are essential for the future of leadership, and that is creativity, collaboration, and compassion. This is your head, hands, and heart activities. And if you want to find out more a little bit about that and how next year could be the year that you step into the future of your leadership and take your team alongside of you, then come along to my workshop. A really short one. I've got a webinar on November the 30th called Are You the Right Leader for the Job? So it's an opportunity for you to do a bit of reflection on your leadership strengths and whether it's well suited to where your team and organization are. I also have a live version of that event on Friday, December the 1st. So Friday morning, come along, do something good for yourself. You can find all the details on my website, Zoë.Travelling. Click on events and follow the links there to register. So in this solosode, I wanted to explore what gets in the way of us striving towards the goal of all human flourishing, and what can we do about that? So I was running a workshop last week, and part of the workshop was listening to each other's life stories. We then went on to explore values and examining how we deal with upsets. So there's three components to the workshop. So very introspective, very deep emotional work there. And I had a question from a participant at the end, which kind of put me on the back foot a little. And he asked, what does this emotional intelligence stuff have to do with leadership? And it struck me, I'm like, okay, clearly I haven't explained something well enough, or maybe it's an assumption that I need to unpack a little bit more. And as we unpack these assumptions, the first assumption to unpack is, well, how do you define leadership? What is leadership? I define leadership as working with others to create a better future. There's a whole bunch of sub-points, activities, regions or areas of responsibility, such as how do we deal with authority? How do we deal with command? What about vision, strategy, problem solving? All of these are categories or aspects of leadership. The roots of leadership, however, need to be really deep. Your leadership tree needs let me try that again. Your leadership tree needs deep roots. And the roots of your leadership tree go into things like your purpose, your values, your character, your virtues. How do you actually put into place your values? Are you consistent and cohesive? No, that's not what I wanted to say. Not cohesive, aligned. Are your practices aligned to your values? That is your virtues. So those are the deep roots of leadership. And I think we can get distracted by the roots and branches. This is not my metaphor. I will link to the article where this metaphor comes from, because it's a pretty sexy metaphor, really. Trees are often good for metaphors. So this is good for your leadership tree metaphor. The roots are purpose, values, character, virtues. And the leaves and branches are essentially your behaviors, your skills, your patterns, your capabilities, and your practices. And we get distracted by the practices, habits, and skills because they seem more visible. This introspective stuff feels like, on the surface, could be time wasting. It is so not. We need to grow our leadership roots. So what gets in the way of us actually growing our leadership roots? I wanted to look at this through the lens of the developmental leadership models, in particular, the spiral dynamics model. There has been some critique of developmental models as being elitist and hierarchical, and sometimes that's warranted, and I think that's also a distraction from the value that developmental models bring. Developmental models show us that there is a pathway to grow and expand our capability to deal with ambiguity, to be more flexible, to be more responsive, and to be more inclusive. That overrides any concern about hierarchy. Besides, there are natural hierarchies everywhere. A child grows into an adult. That is a natural, evolutionary, developmental hierarchy. An acorn grows into an oak tree. Same thing, a natural, evolutionary, developmental hierarchy. In the same way, I think our ability to see complexity, to manage ambiguity, and to be more inclusive goes through a natural hierarchy. The bigger the bigger we get, the larger our vision, the more we see, the better we lead. So what gets in the way of us actually striving towards the goal of human flourishing and gets in the way of us deepening our leadership tree roots? The first stage of developmental leadership talks about beige survival. So survival means that we have all of our basic human needs met: food, shelter, belonging. Actually, belonging is the second order one. So food, water, shelter. And if you look at the Gaza, they've been in beige a lot of the time, and they certainly are now, with a lot of areas of their apartment living just being demolished. A lot of the people living in Gaza are now at survival level. So this does not put us in a good position to start to think about all of human flourishing. We need to get the basics cemented right. So if that's under threat, that is very difficult to come to the table and to think about human flourishing. It's like, well, give me a roof on my head, stop the bombs dropping, and give me some water and some food and some electricity, please. That's one of the things that gets in our way. From a more immediate point of view, if you go to work tired, hungry, then you are basically in survival mode. And I know that on one of my programs, which had late nights and little food initially, this does not set us up for being at our best. So that can get in the way. The next level of development is the purple level in the spiral dynamics model. And this is about tribe and belonging. We feel safe when we are part of a group. And if that is threatened, that can put us on the defensive and aggressive. That's certainly what we're seeing in the Gaza-Israel conflict. It's two or more tribes clashing. Who gets to be part of which tribe? Who gets what ownership of what parcel of land? That's simplification big time of the issues. And this is fundamentally one of the things that's at play in this particular area. And I think it also comes up in the dialogue that we've had around the referendum here in Australia about whose voice gets to be heard and who belongs to the tribe of Australia. Is there a tribe of Australia? Or are we all just disparate groups with our own little pockets of interests? Unresolved answers on that particular question. The next level of leadership, developmental leadership, is the red stage. And red includes power and passion. When we don't have a healthy articulation of power and passion, we have domination and oppression. And I think actually this is one of the biggest concerns we have with the rise of autocrats around the globe, is that this unhealthy expression of red power is leading to the oppression of other people, other tribes, etc. And as a society, we need to be implementing checks on the balances of power. We do not want these dismantled. And the danger in conflict zones is that this is when we tend to dismantle our checks and balances for the expediency of dealing with a crisis. So all eyes on Israel to see what Netanyahu does. Geez, that was a terrible pronunciation of his name. Beg your pardon. To see what he does. Does he try and take more power? Does he try and hang on to power? As an autocrat at the helm, this is a danger zone for us all. Blue, the next stage of the developmental model, is the expression of rules and regulations, exactly responding to the excesses of the power and passion of the earlier stage. If this becomes too regimented, it becomes too inflexible and not adaptable to the current times. How hard is it to change the Constitution? Extremely hard. And probably outdated. The fact that 4 states need to be in agreement to change the Constitution and the ACT and Northern Territory don't count is just bizarre. So here's an example of rules and regulations that need to be updated to be more responsive to our current circumstances. The fact that we couldn't change the Constitution when we have clearly a need to do so is part of our challenges here. The orange state of leadership maturity in response to the excesses of blue, which is stymied and stuck, if you like, being too process-oriented and not flexible enough, is wealth achievement. Wealth and achievement. So this collective desire to grow and prosper emerges out of the buckling down, the sewing up, the rules-imposed order of the blue stage, the excess of that. So wealth and achievement allows us to move beyond the rules and regulation to start creating and growing again. The excesses of this particular stage are greed, manipulation, exploitation, and we see elements of this across all of our societies around the globe. Now, the excesses of orange give birth to the green stage in the developmental model, and this is the stage of inclusion, of environmentalism, where our care and concern for others grows exponentially. Our sense of tribe is not just one tribe, it's all of us. It also has a massive blind spot, and the green blind spot makes us feel disdain, frustration, and judgment towards those who don't have as inclusive a perspective. And we see this in some of the dialogue we've had around the discussion around the voice. If you did not agree with someone's perspective, then you obliterated their point of view altogether, dismissed them. And this is not great because 60% of the population had an opinion that did not concur with the 40% that did want to change the Constitution. What are we missing? If you wanted to vote yes and you did vote yes, what did you miss in the no side? And vice versa. Have we lost our ability to deeply listen to one another? Tim Urban, in his fantastic book, still my favorite leadership book this year, which is What is Wrong with Us, a self-help book for society, is great at exposing how we've come to be so polarized. And I think the danger is that we can get so passionate about standing on our principles from our point of view, thinking this is the right way, this is the more compassionate way, this is the more inclusive way, that we disparage anyone who has a different point of view. I'm guilty of that as well. It's much easier to feel like you're on the right side. It's much more challenging to go, I'm going to hold my beliefs lightly and really get curious about other beliefs around me and explore common ground together. Explore common ground together. This is what we need next in this country, in Australia, towards reconciliation and hearing the voices and encouraging flourishing for all of the citizens of Australia. So, back to brass tacks though, how does this apply to you in your individual world? Well, let me tell you about an incident that happened, because it's not just the developmental model lens that has an impact on how we show up and how we can implement or not implement this vision for human flourishing for all. It was a WhatsApp mishap on my recent program in the outdoors. It was the day after a really long night, which followed a really long night the night before. So I was tired. And there was a message on WhatsApp from one of the crew that said, hey, your participants have left gear out in the rain. Make sure they pull it all in because the consequences are that the gear will get wet, it'll go moldy, and has big knock-on effects. So that was the message, and there was a picture of the situation. I had a reaction, not a response. I had an immediate visceral reaction because my buttons were hot. They were hot because I hadn't slept well, hadn't eaten well, and I went straight to storytelling about this particular experience. And I'll take a page out of Brené Brown here, who likes to frame her reactions as, the story I'm telling myself is. So the story I told myself at the time was, how the heck am I supposed to be responsible for this particular activity if I'm not told about it? So I was feeling righteous and wronged. I didn't know I was responsible for this particular activity. If I had, I would have bloody pulled in all the stuff and made sure it didn't sit out in the rain. And why are you chastising me in public on the app? You know, it felt passive aggressive. So I went on my high horse going, meh, 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 meh. So I had a little rant. And then I went to deal with it the next day because I got this at an inconvenient time where I was out with the group. So I couldn't actually talk to the person about this particular incident. So by then I'd thought through all the issues and still managed to have a okay conversation about it. It was rushed. There was a lot more context to that, but that is essentially it. I had a reaction. Why? Well, my beige primal needs weren't being met very well. Didn't have enough sleep. And then there was my red hot buttons. This whole addition, the whole power thing. I felt like I was being oppressed. I felt like my own autonomy, my responsibility was not being served well. And there were also some other primary fight, flight, fleeing kind of buttons being pressed. And if you know the work of David Rock, he's an Australian neuroscientist. He talks about the SCARF model. You might have heard it before. The triggers that send us into aggressive or fleeing, kind of the fight or flight response. Status is the S. C is certainty. A is autonomy. R is relatedness. And F is fairness. As in, the loss of any one of those can cause us to go into a fight or flight response. For me, in that particular situation, not only did I not have enough sleep and feeling a little bit like my autonomy was being pushed, it was a threat to my status as a high performer. I'd like to do a good job on my programs, and here was someone giving me public feedback that things were not up to scratch. Oof, took a chunk out of my status. And I also felt it was unfair. So why was it unfair? Because I believed I hadn't been told that I was responsible for this particular activity. So why hold me to account if I didn't even know I had to do this thing? So those two hot buttons were flaring big time. Here's the thing. We're all a hot mess. We need to give ourselves permission to look after ourselves so we don't spill our mess on others. So coming back to the original question from my participant, how does all this emotional intelligence stuff got to do with leadership? It has everything to do with leadership. We need to get these basics right. So here are your takeaway tips. You need to practice self-study. You need to know your buttons. We need to practice self-monitoring. We need to manage those buttons. We need to practice self-care so we can diffuse our buttons. Only then are we ready to do the higher level, future fit leadership activities that are head, heart, and hands. That is your creativity, your compassion, and your collaboration. We need to nail those basics first because we can't be showing up in a collaborative, creative session with our colleagues a hot mess. Makes for exciting drama, maybe not for fabulous leadership, and certainly not for a thorough thinking about human flourishing for all. So if you want some help getting your team fit for the future, send me an email. Let me know. We can chat about it. I'd love to send you a complimentary future fit assessment to see where the gaps and opportunities are for you and your team to be fit for the future. I'd love to hear your opinion on the show. This podcast is deeply enriching for me. I have such a great experience exploring these topics with other authors, experts, and leaders. I'm growing as a leader myself. I'm growing as a practitioner. And I do hope that you are gaining benefit from the insights that come to you every week. Love your feedback. You can email me, Zoe@Zoe.com. Please post and review the podcast. That really does help get the word out. And if you want to keep committing and seeing the podcast next year, just let me know. It's nice to hear from you. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.